Everything humans build will eventually decay or be destroyed. Nothing is permanent. Buildings that once reflected an opulent lifestyle, or a town or village that had a strong culture and a rich history, will eventually decay, just as others did before them. The following are 5 structures and communities that once thrived, but are now nothing more. Number 5. Hachicho Royal Hotel, Hachitojima, Japan. The mid-1960s saw a substantial number of Japanese travel abroad for the first time, so the tourism industry looked nearer to home to find luxurious accommodation. They chose the subtropical Izu island of Hachitojima, which was 287 kilometers south of Tokyo. There was short travel times by ferry and a ready-made airport which could handle large numbers of tourists. The government promoted the island as the Hawaii of Japan, where the island saw rapid investment and property development. The largest of these developments was the lavish Hachicho Royal Hotel, modelled on the French Baroque architecture. Along with plaster renditions of Greek statues and ornate water fountains, it stood as a showcase of the economic boom taking place in Japan. When it opened in 1963, it was one of the largest hotels in Japan and attracted its clientele from the expanding Japanese middle class. Unfortunately, after 30 years, the glamour of the hotel began to wash off as the Japanese started to look further afield to other exotic places that had world-class beaches such as Hawaii, Guam, and Thailand. This meant that to keep up with overseas competition, the Hachicho Royal Hotel had to reinvent itself and changed its name to Hachicho Oriental Resort. Unfortunately, this was not enough to attract tourists, and the hotel ceased operations in 2006. The harsh tropical heat and salt water has led to fast deterioration of the hotel and its surroundings, where the grounds are now overgrown. There is little likelihood of finding a new owner, as this once grand hotel is crumbling around itself and it is slowly being reclaimed by the jungle. Number 4. Verushka Famagusta, Northern Cyprus. Verushka is one of the Mediterranean's best kept secrets, where there is miles of sand with dozens of grand hotels. But if you wish to visit, you will need to pack bolt cutters to get through the fence. Unfortunately, Cyprus was divided in 1974 after years of inter-ethnic violence, culminating in a coup inspired by Greece's ruling military junta. Turkey invaded Cyprus and occupied the northern third of the island. Before the invasion, Verushka was a booming resort which attracted the rich and famous due to its glorious beaches and was the hub of art and intellectual activity. They described it as the French Riviera of Cyprus. The resort was fenced off by the Turkish military and has been a ghost town ever since. The environment now looks like a post-apocalyptic nightmare where nature has slowly taken over and prickly pear bushes have overrun the entire 6 square kilometres. There are trees that have sprouted through living rooms. There are signs that warn tourists that try to peer through the cyclone fence that photos and filming are forbidden, and trespassers risk their lives. Those that did risk danger and managed to venture inside have described extraordinary sights. A car dealership still stocked with 1974 cars, window displays of mannequins dressed in 70s fashions. Sand dunes have encroached over the seafront, and the photos that have managed to take showed nothing but devastation, where anything of value had been looted long ago, and the infrastructure is now damaged beyond repair. Number 3. OradoursurGlane, Haute-Vienne in France. OradoursurGlane was one of the few peaceful villages that had survived from the Roman days, but this peace was shattered when on June 10, 1944, on a beautiful summer day, in the village of OradoursurGlane, 642 innocent men, women and children lost their lives at the hands of Waffen SS soldiers in Hitler's elite army, and the whole town was destroyed. The SS soldiers had bought all the equipment necessary to destroy the village, including bombs, grenades, cartridges and incendiary bombs, and a collection of modern weapons. It appears to have been a reprisal for the French resistance for blowing up a bridge on June the 9th, only 13 kilometres from the village. But no one in the village had anything to do with the French resistance, and no weapons had ever been stored there, and no French resistance fighters had ever stayed there. There had been no attacks on SS soldiers from anyone in the town, nor anywhere near it. The town's inhabitants were neither collaborators with the enemy nor connected in any way with the resistance movement. They were engaged only in peaceful pursuits, such as playing soccer, fishing in the Glane River, gathering in the numerous cafes. There was also an equal number of refugees there at the time of the massacre. There were even a few Jewish people hiding in the village, safe in the knowledge that the villagers were non-partisan, so there was no reason for the German occupiers to ever enter the village. The town was surrounded by small hamlets where the farmers lived. They shopped in the town and sent their children to the Oradour schools. After the war, a new village with the same name was built nearby because President Charles de Gaulle ordered the original be maintained as a memorial to the massacre. Number 2. Pripyat, Ukraine. On April 26, 1986, a reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear station exploded, causing fire which led to huge damage to the building, releasing extremely dangerous amounts of radioactive chemicals into the air, which over time contaminated millions of square miles in dozens of European nations. The IAEA estimates that approximately 30 people were killed by the explosion and related radiation exposure, with several thousand additional deaths due to higher cancer incidence possible over the long term. The towns closest to the reactor was Pripyat, a city of 49,000, founded in 1970 to house workers from Chernobyl. It had 15 primary schools, a large hospital complex, 25 stores, 10 gyms, along with parks, cinemas, factories, pool, amusement park. It was a thriving community. The people who lived there claimed it was one of the most beautiful and luxurious cities in the Soviet Union. Because Pripyat was only about 3 kilometres from the explosion, on April the 27th, the entire city had only 3 hours to evacuate. 3 decades later, this ghost town is now frozen in time, and if you were to walk through the town, you would be walking back to the past, to the Soviet Union of 1986. Communist propaganda still hangs on walls, personal belongings litter the streets, and abandoned buildings. The hammer and sickle decorate lampposts, advertising the May Day celebrations that would never take place. Toys are strewn about the schoolhouse, where they were suddenly dropped by children. All clocks are frozen at 11:55, the moment the electricity was cut. However, the absence of humans has been excellent for wildlife, where deer and boar populations returned almost immediately. After the elk, moose, deer and boar returned, so did their predators, the wolves and the lynx. After only 3 decades of abandonment, Pripyat is beginning to be swallowed up by the surrounding forest. Someday soon, it will be completely overgrown. Number 1. Bannerman Castle, Plepple Island, Hudson River, New York State. The crumbling Bannerman Castle is situated about 50 miles from north of New York City and close to the Hudson River. The castle is built on a small rocky island named Plepple, and it represents the remains of an empire. The man who built the structure was Francis Bannerman, who was born in Dundee, Scotland in 1851 and immigrated to the United States at the age of 3. While attending school in Brooklyn, New York, Francis began collecting and selling scrap from the harbour. In 1865, at the age of only 14, Francis founded his own company to sell military surplus goods. His business was called Bannerman's, and he went from selling scrap metal and munitions to purchasing ships at Navy auctions. Bannerman brought 90% of the US Army surplus after the Spanish-American War. He bought so much equipment and ammunition that city laws forced him to look for storage outside of city limits. In 1900, he purchased Pripyat Island as a safe storage site, and a year later, construction began on a Scottish-style castle and residence. The designs for the elaborate buildings were drafted by Bannerman himself, when nearly all of the construction was completed without professional help from architects, engineers or contractors. Most of the buildings were used as storage, and a smaller castle on top of the island was built as the family's summer home. While Bannerman decorated inside, his wife created beautiful paths and terraces with flowers and other plants, some of which can still be seen today. On the side of the building, you can see a huge sign that reads Bannerman's Island Arsenal and is still visible to train passengers. When Bannerman died in 1918, all construction halted. Then 2 years later, 200 pounds of shells and powder exploded, destroying a portion of the complex. However, the family continued to use the residence through the 1930s. Then in 1950, a storm sunk the ferryboat Pripyat, which was the only means of servicing the island. In 1957, the property's last superintendent retired, and the island was left vacant. Disaster struck again in the summer of 1969, when a devastating fire left much of the structure in ruins. Vandals and negligence have all contributed to the island's state of decay. Since the early 1990s, the Bannerman Castle Trust has worked for the preservation of the island for its cultural and historical value, and hoped to stabilise the remaining structures, all of which have lost their internal floors and non-structural walls.